A small garden, one whiteboard, a few kids. I taught them how to boil eggs, mend shirts, grow beans. The HOA called it a violation. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, because the same people who shut the class down don't know their own kids were in it. And tonight, the truth enters the meeting room. I never thought that teaching kids how to boil eggs without them exploding would make adults angry. But then on a Monday morning, I stepped out into my backyard as usual, preparing for my little life skills class, and found a bright red notice taped to the wooden gate. Violation notice. Improper use of residential property, disrupting community living. All backyard class activities must cease within 24 hours. Signed, Evergreen Hills, HOA. I stood there frozen for 10 seconds, still holding a carton of eggs. I didn't charge anyone. I didn't advertise. I didn't put up a sign. All I'd done for the past 2 months was teach the kids in the neighborhood, from a clumsy 3rd grader to a quiet 6th grader, how to cook a simple meal, patch a flat tire, and grow vegetables from seeds. I called it the Quiet Station, a name I wrote in white chalk on a repurposed plastic board staked in the middle of the bean garden. At first, there were just 2 kids, then 5, then 10. They brought each other. Some even brought their moms, dads, even grandmas, just to see if it's safe. They said, I remember once while showing them how to peel squash without slicing your hand, one mother sat at the garden's edge and softly asked, "Why do you do this?" I said, "Because when I was little, no one did it for me." She didn't say anything, just exhaled. Now all of it was being labeled as a disturbance. I quietly cleaned the kitchen area, stacked the chairs, wiped down the whiteboard. I made no announcements. That afternoon, the kids still came. When they saw the garden empty, they didn't speak. They just looked at me. I told them I'm not allowed to teach anymore. The HOA said no. One of them, Ben 4th grade glasses, looked up and asked, "What's the HOA?" I didn't get to answer. A familiar voice came from behind the fence. "It's the group that makes sure everything stays orderly." "Sweetheart," I turned. It was Miss Karen, HOA president. She stood there, neat skirt, hair pinned up, clipboard in hand. But what stopped me cold was the child standing behind her, Eli. One of my first students. One of my best, the one who once told me, "I want to do what you do when I grow up." I looked at Eli, then at her. She was still trying to smile, but the white-knuckled grip on her clipboard said everything. She didn't know that I knew, but I did. Her son had been learning here and thriving more than she ever imagined. I said nothing. I just turned to the kids. "Go home. Class is canceled today." They left slowly, not fully understanding. I knew I couldn't get angry. I needed to strike back, but this time I wouldn't use the law. I'd use the truth, and I knew exactly how to tell it, so everyone would have no choice but to listen. I spent the entire evening not getting angry. Instead of writing a complaint or typing out a rebuttal email, I brewed a pot of tea, sat in the garden where the kids once laughed while burning toast, and made a list of everyone who had ever come to class. Not the student, the parents. I counted 14 adults who had at some point sat in to observe, asked to take photos, or requested the soft-boiled egg recipe. 3 of them had chuckled when I said, "There are no grades here." I didn't call them. I didn't ask for help. I simply mailed each of them a piece of paper, 3 lines only. "Sorry for the sudden class closure. I was asked to stop due to disruption of community use. If you ever found value in what we did here, and if you can please speak up." Not for me, for the kids. No signature, no logo, no Ethan, the freelance teacher, just paper. Just the truth. And then I waited. 3 days later, a post appeared on the neighborhood forum titled, "My child took Ethan's class." Here's what I saw. It was from Laura, Emma's mom. Emma, the girl who once feared fire but after 3 sessions could fry an egg and pack her own bento box. The post was short, no embellishment but clear. Ethan never charged anyone. He never asked about anyone's religion. He didn't require uniforms. He didn't rank kids. He just asked each one, "What do you want to learn today?" Comments followed, dozens. My son learned how to fold a shirt there. I sat in. Once, no cameras, no announcements. But it was the first time I saw my child laugh after spilling water. If that class is considered a disturbance, then I don't know what counts as teaching anymore. I didn't reply, but I read every word. On the 5th day, one comment made me stop. "Hello, I'm Eli's father. My ex-wife is the current HOA president. I don't want to get involved in politics, but I want to state Ethan's class is the only thing that made my son willingly put down a screen. He never wanted to learn anywhere until he learned how to plant a single bean. The tide shifted. The HOA made no public response, but Karen sent me a brief message. Could you stop escalating this online? Can we talk in private? I didn't reply because I hadn't escalated anything. I hadn't posted a thing. I had only sent paper. And everything that followed came from people speaking for themselves, and I knew once the truth starts walking on someone else's feet, no red stamp can stop it. That afternoon, I brought the whiteboard back into the garden, wrote a new line, class is on pause, but memory isn't, and beneath it, if you've ever sat here, leave a sentence, any sentence. I left a marker, a chair, and went inside. The next morning, there were 17 sentences. No names, no signatures. But one line made my throat tighten. Here my child was never called by the wrong name. I knew then I didn't need to win. I just needed to make sure what was right had a place to stand. Week after Laura's post had spread across the neighborhood forum, the HOA released a terse announcement. Emergency meeting, but yeah, discussion on unauthorized communal activity within the Evergreen Hills community. Attendance required all residents. They didn't need to name anyone. Everyone knew. I had no intention of going. I'd stood in rooms like this before 3 people at the head table, one with a plastic gavel, 5 minutes of polite introductions, then 5 minutes of criticism disguised as open dialogue. But Mina, now in 8th grade, once one of my garden class kids came to my house. She placed a folded piece of paper on my table. I don't know what they're going to say, she told me. But if you're not there, they'll say your silence meant you agreed. I looked at her small hair tied to the side, dirt still on her fingers from planting, and I understood I had to go. That evening, the community hall was packed, not from curiosity, but because people were done being spoken for. Karen sat at the center of the head table, straight-backed, beige dress, lips drawn tight. She opened with a long statement. As residents, we have the right to protect the peace and shared safety of our neighborhood. Activities resembling instructional sessions, even with good intentions, must go through the proper channels. Failure to comply with this risks setting an undesirable precedent. I sat quietly in the 3rd row. I didn't interrupt. She never said my name. She used phrases like a certain individual, unregistered activities, emotional responses, spreading online. I thought it would follow the usual HOA script, talk longwear, people down end with a memo. But then the man in the front row stood up. David, Karen's ex-husband, Eli's father. He held no notes, didn't raise his voice. He simply walked slowly to the front, turned his back to the board, faced the room, and said in a calm, steady voice, I don't usually speak, but my son took Ethan's class, and I'll keep it short. If you think that class is a threat, the greater threat is teaching our children that kindness without prior authorization is wrong. Silence fell like a dropped cloth. No one interrupted. David looked at Karen, said nothing more, then sat back down like reading aloud a passage from a book whose ending everyone already knew. Karen said nothing, but her hand resting on the table stopped trembling. She looked up at me for the first time that night and nodded. Not to greet me, to acknowledge she knew the tide had turned. That night, I didn't reopen the class, but I did put the whiteboard back up. Wrote one line, if you want to learn, come in. I don't test, I only ask, what do you want to know today? The next morning, 7 kids showed up. By afternoon, 3 adults joined them. One brought bread, one brought a measuring tape, and one brought a newly approved HOA volunteer registration form. No conditions, no administrative fines, no ban on teaching. Just one box. Purpose of this class, I wrote, so that everyone can do something with their own 2 hands without needing permission. And I knew this time no one would dare tear that paper down, because their own children would be the ones to pick it back up and ask why I didn't strike a gong to reopen class. No email announcements, no new signage. I simply wiped the whiteboard clean, rehung the pen bucket, and opened the garden gate. That small backyard garden, once slapped with warning signs, once criticized as an unauthorized teaching space, was now the first place in the neighborhood people came to, not because they were invited, but because they wanted to. The kids came back first. One banged on a pot, another carried chairs. Mina brought 2 nails and a rope. To hang a sunshade, uncle, she said. Ben showed up early, quietly reassembling the drying rack he had taken apart himself the week the class was forced to stop. I gave no speech, just quietly asked, who wants to learn what today? One wanted to learn how to sew on a button. One asked why lights flicker when wires touch water. Another daughter of someone who once sided with the HOA raised her hand, then hesitated. I asked, "What would you like?" she whispered. "I want to learn how to say thank you." Without feeling awkward, I nodded. "Let's start today." The class was the same as always. No grades, no levels. Everyone got a seat, a task, a moment to be heard. But the biggest change was the adults. They didn't stand outside the fence anymore. They sat down. One brought a camera asking to take photos to send to her child living far away. So they remember there are still places where people teach things. Everyone assumes you should just know another now. A member of the HOA showed up with a sign-up form. "I want to teach a cooking class for kids whose parents aren't home at night." I handed her a chair and the whiteboard. "When does your class start?" I asked. She smiled. "As soon as you take a 10-minute break." So I did. For the first 10-minute break in 4 months, I sat in my own chair, poured tea, and listened as someone else showed a child how to wash their hands without wasting water. I didn't know who she used to be, but I knew this space was beginning to be shared. It was no longer Ethan's class. It was a space anyone could step into, offer something, then step back out of quietly without being forgotten. That week, I wrote a single line in my journal. A real class doesn't start when the teacher speaks, but when the students no longer need one. And as I closed the book, I heard laughter from the far end of the garden, 2 men debating how long to soak lettuce in ice water before serving. I didn't interfere, because I knew anything that's truly good will figure out how to stay alive, as long as there are enough people willing to step in and keep it alive with kindness. No permission required. I thought everything would end there. A small backyard garden, an impromptu group of learners, a whiteboard propped back up after a few weeks of being torn down. But I forgot one thing: when something is built through goodwill and survives pressure, it stops being just a matter of one corner of a yard. 3 weeks after the class resumed, I received an email from an unfamiliar address, sinmo@learnroot.org. Subject: "We want to learn from your class." Literally, it was a letter from a group of residents in the next city over. They live in a model neighborhood where the HOA no longer fines anyone for curtain colors, but it's become too quiet to the point that kids no longer gather unless there's a scheduled event with adult supervision. They said they had heard about the quiet little station from a grandmother who once brought her grandchild to my class to learn how to boil an egg. Now they wanted to replicate the idea of a community class. No gatekeeping, no fees, just real. No sponsorship, no contracts. They simply asked if I could come share how I did it. I read the email and smiled. My class didn't have a method, no blueprint, no curriculum. I used to do everything by asking the kids, "What do you want to learn today?" But then I remembered something Mina once said. Maybe the best thing you ever taught was how not to teach. So I said yes. Sunday morning, I drove 18 minutes to that neighborhood, Briarwood Hills. It was clean, quiet, lovely. They had a public green space, everyone called the nameless park. They laid out picnic mats, propped up a whiteboard, and asked me to stand in the center and share. I looked at 20 adults seated in front of me, teachers, engineers, homemakers, even an old man who biked there just to hear something real. I didn't bring handouts, no slides. I simply told them, and I started the class because one kid sat alone behind a fence and said no one had taught him how to boil an egg. I said, "Come by tomorrow." Someone asked, "How do you maintain discipline?" I replied, "I don't." They keep each other in check. Another asked, "Do you need a registration form?" I said, "Never had one." Each kid comes and goes. The only thing I kept in place was the hand washing bucket. Then someone asked the most important question: how do we scale it without losing what made it special? I paused, then said, "Don't try to scale it. Let it grow again from your own soil. Don't bring my class over. Create a place where people can sit down together without having to perform." They nodded. A young mother teared up, and "I think I'll start by inviting in the 3 kids next door over to peel some carrots." I left without leaving anything behind, except for a handwritten note: "Start with truth, sustain with listening." That evening, I opened my inbox. 3 more invitations. One from the North, one from a group of independent educators, one from an educational nonprofit asking me to be an honorary advisor. I stared at the glowing white lines on my screen and felt uneasy, because I knew what once survived in silence, if brought into the spotlight, might grow. But it might also be pulled so far from its roots that I no longer recognized myself in it, and I knew that one day I'd have to choose to keep the class just as it was, or let it become something bigger, and risk losing what mattered most. Its quiet, its honesty, It's refusal to ask permission, just to care. A week after I visited Briarwood Hills, I got a call from a TV editor from a Saturday morning program called The New Guides. She spoke gently, no theatrics. We don't want to make you a hero. We just want to document how someone held on to something using only their bare hands. I laughed. If you film me scraping a stove with a toothbrush, no one's going to be moved. But I said yes, not to be seen on television, but to say it all clearly once and for all. I thought maybe if people understood, this didn't start as some grand plan to inspire anyone. But from an old whiteboard and a broken chair, someone else might dare to start something similar without needing permission. Studio lights came on. I sat opposite the host, someone I'd seen on TV for years, her eyes sincere, her voice never rising above calm. I told the whole story, left nothing. Out the citation letter, Eli standing behind his mother, the whiteboard that got wiped clean and then rewritten by the kids themselves. I thought that would be it, but then the host said, "We have one more guest today, a former HOA representative from Evergreen Hills present. During the start of this story, she asked to share something she's never said before. Before I could react, the lights shifted. Walking into the studio was Karen. Same cream-colored, same tightly pinned hair, but something was different. No clipboard, no neighborhood manager aura, just a woman standing upright beneath studio lights with nothing to shield her but her own spine. The host invited her to sit, then asked Karen, "Why did you come today?" Karen looked at me, then into the camera. She spoke slowly without excuses, because I used to think that anything not written in the rules was a threat. And I used the law exactly as written to shut down what I didn't understand. Now I do. I said nothing. I was never someone who needed an apology to move on, but she kept going. I still remember the day my son Eli brought home a bunch of herbs from Ethan's class. He said, "I grew this. No one helped, but everyone watched." I asked him, "Why do you like learning there?" He said, "Because no one says my name wrong." The entire studio fell silent. I still didn't speak. The host looked at me, asked gently, "Ethan, if you could say one thing to Karen right now, what would it be?" I looked at her. For a long time, then I said I won't say anything because the only thing I ever wanted from anyone who opposed me was for them to stop. She stopped, and I think that's enough, Karen nodded. No tears, she didn't need them. She simply said, "Thank you." The recording ended. I didn't go straight home. I took a detour through the old street where I once put up the sign, "Class paused temporarily." That spot now had a new sign. "If you've ever thought you have nothing to teach, please come in." I don't know who wrote it. Maybe Mina. Maybe a kid who used to be afraid to ask questions twice. All I know is this: I'm no longer the one who runs the class. I'm the person who once got banned from teaching, and because of that, learned the greatest lesson of all. The real classroom isn't in the backyard. It's in the memories of those who once sat down, looked one another in the eye, and quietly asked themselves, "What do I want to learn today?" One midweek morning, as I was rearranging the bookshelf after our How to Slice Melon Without Breaking the Flesh session, I received an official letter from the California State Office of Community Education Reform. In the letter they wrote, "We deeply appreciate Mr. Ethan H. His informal classroom model at Evergreen Hills, which has spread a spirit of self-learning and self-agency in life skill education. We invite you to serve as lead advisor in drafting the proposed voluntary community learning space standards." I read it 3 times. Not a word out of place. They want me, the man once banned from teaching by a neighborhood HOA, to help the government build a national framework based on a class like mine. They called it scaling positive impact. But the more I read, the more something felt off. I told Alan, my partner from the earliest days. He frowned. "So they're going to turn your class into a mold and print out 10 of the same model?" I nodded. Alan exhaled and said nothing more. I was left unsettled. I'd only ever meant to hold space for a small group of kids and teach them the things no one else had. I never imagined this class might become a standard. That evening, I walked the garden. The kids were repainting the benches. One of them asked Uncle if we paint the colors differently. "Is that wrong?" I replied instantly without thinking. If everyone looked the same, it'd be boring. Coloring outside the lines is a way of leaving your mark. Then I froze, because that sentence was the very reason I couldn't sign my name onto any framework. The next morning, I handwrote a letter back to the reform office. "I appreciate the invitation, but I must decline the role of drafting a framework. My class has never had a framework, because that's exactly what makes it open to those who don't fit into any existing mold. If you wish to learn from this model, let it continue as it was born. No uniforms, no grading charts, no approvals. Just enough seats for everyone. I don't know if they were disappointed. But I do know, had I accepted this original classroom, would have turned into Model A Variant B, and one day a kid in some other city would walk into a class with my name on the door and get marked down for coloring outside the lines. I didn't want that. I called Mina over. Gave her a hand-drawn map of the neighborhoods I'd visited, the places I'd once been asked to share. I told her if someone asks, where is his class now, give them this map and say, it's not that the class is here, it's that he once sat here, looked someone in the eye and asked, what do you want to learn today? Mina nodded, no questions. She understood. She's someone who once came to my class, not to be called on, but to be listened to. That night I sat alone and wrote a new line on the whiteboard. There is no standard for kindness, only space for it to happen. And I left that line untouched all week. Each day someone added below it in colored chalk, like when I first learned how to fold a shirt, like when I patched my backpack and no one laughed, like when my little brother learned to tie his shoes without being scolded. I read every note, but I didn't edit a thing, because the moment we begin editing, this class becomes a textbook, and textbooks don't know when to be quiet. But me, I want this place to always keep the right, to stay silent and still be understood. I called that trip the unannounced visit. No emails, no schedule, no messages beforehand. I simply opened the hand-drawn map Mina had been updating, marked with places where people had said something like, the first classroom exists here. I picked 3 spots, not close, not far. One up north, cold hills with nearly bare apple trees. One on the desert, a fringe where people learned how to clean their hands with very little water. And one right in the middle of the city, in the courtyard of an old apartment block, through a narrow path between 2 gray walls. I arrived at the first location early morning. No one was waiting. I stepped into the backyard of a modest house, 6 wooden chairs, an old chalkboard, and an elderly woman teaching 2 kids how to peel apples without browning the flesh, using bamboo sticks. I sat quietly. She didn't ask who I was. Only after the children took a break did she turn to me and say, first time here, isn't it? I nodded. She continued. This place started after I read about someone who'd been banned from teaching. I thought if it could be done, there maybe we could try here too. I asked, did you ever write down a name? She shook her head. No, I was afraid that once a name gets written, people might end up keeping the name and forgetting what that person actually did. I said nothing. Then left after sipping a ginger tea she'd made. No photos, no record of the board, just wind rustling through dry apple leaves. The second place was in a desert community. I arrived at noon. In the yard was an old tarp for shade, a metal basin of water, and a chalk message. Wash your hands, just don't wash away the memories. A boy was laughing loudly after making a chapati that didn't tear around the edges. I asked a man nearby who was watching over them. Does this place have a name? He said, yes, but the kids name it themselves, changes every week. This week it was called Anyone's Classroom last week, where no one gets asked their score. I wrote that down, then moved on. The last stop was in the heart of the city, where I expected noise, crowds, and stress. But it was just a shared courtyard with 3 chairs arranged in a triangle and a young woman teaching an elderly man how to send photos on his phone. I didn't interrupt. But after they finished, I walked over and asked, where did you learn this model? She smiled. I didn't. I just heard a segment on the radio where someone said, if a place can start with a whiteboard and a few honest questions, then anywhere can be a classroom. I asked, do you know who that person was? She shook her head. I don't need to. I just needed to hold on to the thing that made me start. I thanked her, then headed home. On the way back, I didn't feel like I just inspected or validated anything. I felt like I had witnessed the way something right spreads not by a person's name, but by a feeling that somewhere someone had once said, done, or endured something so that others could begin without being stopped. I returned home, opened my notebook, and wrote, I don't need anyone to say my name, as long as they still speak of a place where anyone can learn, not because they're granted permission, but because no one tried to stop them. I closed the notebook, set it on the old shelf, and knew the classroom was never truly mine. It belongs to anyone who still keeps a board, a chair, and a question honest enough to make others want to answer. I returned to Evergreen Hills on a quiet Thursday afternoon with a light rain falling. No one knew I had been away. No one needed to know I was back. I simply walked past the familiar wooden gate, gently opened the back garden door, the very patch once marked with a notice for violating community usage, and found it still a garden. Still with the whiteboard, though no longer with my handwriting. On the board that day, written in slanted green chalk, was this line: "Today, if you don't feel like learning anything, that's okay. Just sitting still is a kind of learning." I stood there for a long while, watching the kids quietly drawing leaves, while a man I'd never seen before was showing a little girl how to fold a napkin into the shape of a bird. No one noticed me. No one ran up shouting, "Uncle Ethan's back," and that more than anything made me feel light. I sat on an old wooden chair, the one Alan and I had built by hand. The wood had darkened, more worn but sturdier. A little boy about 6 looked at me and handed me a towel. He said nothing. Probably thought I was a parent. I used the towel to wipe the table, leaving no trace. When the session ended, a young woman with soft curls and thin glass approached me holding a clipboard. She spoke softly. "Are you Uncle Ethan?" I nodded. She smiled, not excitedly, just warmly enough. I took over the class after Mina. "Would you like to stay for the sharing circle this afternoon?" I asked, "Are you following the original model?" She answered without pause, "No, sir." "Because you never set one, I'm just following the feeling." I smiled, nodded, and followed her into the small old storage shed, the same one where I'd once kept the whiteboard after the class was suspended. Now it was the end-of-day sharing room. Nothing inside but a few floor cushions, a single ceiling lamp, and a wooden box labeled, "Speak if you want, sit if you don't." I sat, said nothing. Someone shared how they held a fruit knife for the first time today. Someone told a story about their grandfather who taught them how to mend pants by hand when there was no money for a sewing machine. An older man said, "I sit here because I used to have nowhere to sit." No one talked about success. No one mentioned my name. Nothing was recorded to post online. And yet everything felt exactly right. The spirit I once hoped to protect when I first started the class with just a whiteboard and a small question. After the circle, I stayed behind to tidy the courtyard. Anne said, "You don't have to, sir." I just shook my head. Cleaning is how I say thank you, and as night fell, I left no one needed to see me out. But as I passed through the gate, I saw a small piece of paper pinned to the wood. No signature, just one line. "The class isn't closed, Uncle. It's just someone else holding it now." I pulled the paper down, folded it, didn't take it with me. I left it in the wooden "Say If You Want" box because I knew from now on there was nothing left for me to carry. Everything that needed to be kept was already being held. In their hands, in their way, and with a kind of care that never needed a name. I came home that night without turning on the lights. The tea was still in the pot, cooled but not bitter. I sat down at the familiar wooden table where since the first day of the class I had placed the same old notebook. Soft leather cover corners peeling bit by bit, the scent of the paper having long since changed. Inside it was everything the day I wrote about the first board being wiped clean, the day I jotted down the name of the first child who asked, "Can I sit here?" And the day I wrote, "I no longer keep anything, only write it down." I flipped to the last page. Still blank. One corner of the page was smudged with water. Probably from that rainy day. I left it out on the porch. I didn't plan to write much, and I wasn't writing for anyone to read. But I knew this much a journey only truly lives when someone dares to pause, not from weariness, but because they know. "It's enough," I wrote slowly. My handwriting no longer as even as before, but each word breathed gently. I once kept a class without a name, in a garden without a sign with students who never had to register. That class was once shut down, forgotten, erased. But it came back, not because of me, but because of those who believed if someone is quiet enough to listen, every child will find their voice. Today I don't write to continue, I write to close, like shutting a door. Not because the day has ended, but because whoever remains already understands. I closed the notebook, left it unlocked. Just as it was sitting there on the table, outside the wind rustled through the bean garden. The streetlight cast a soft glow onto the exact corner of the house where I once pinned the sign, "If you don't know how to teach anything, come sit with us first." I never erased that line. But tomorrow I might write a new one, not to carry on, but to keep the whiteboard from turning to stone. Maybe something like, "No class today, but if you need to share something, the board is still open." And if one day I can no longer write at all, that's all right too. Because I know there will always be someone who still has steady hands, who still remembers how to breathe gently, who still knows how to look kindly at small things, and someday somewhere far away. If a child ever asks someone, "Has anyone ever taught you how to cook?" then maybe somewhere someone will answer, "There was once a small class, no sign, but everyone who came was welcome to sit, and the person who started it didn't leave behind their name only away." And that will be enough. Thank you for listening to this journey all the way through. If this story made you pause, reflect, or simply see a part of yourself in it, please like the video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so we can keep holding on to the stories worth telling.